Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll welcome everybody here to Bandon. And Mr. Chair, we do have a number of director's report items. Before I begin on those, I just wanted to mention briefly that you all are aware we had a very tragic situation in the Mountain View National Forest earlier this week with the apparent death of a female hiker, death by cougar. And so we're continuing to work on that issue and don't have any updates for you here today other than what we're reporting in the media. We have an incident response team that's on the ground and currently working. So with that, I wanted to begin, and we did provide field reports to you in written form. We won't go over those with you here today. I'd like to have Erica Kleiner come up and give an expenditure report. I think Erica is here. Oh, there she is. Okay. She's in the far reaches of the room.
Good morning, Chair Weber and members of the Commission. For the record, I'm Erica Kleiner. I'm the Management Resources Division Administrator. And I'm here today to give you the department financial report. So for the financial report, we basically don't have any changes. You had Deputy Director Cameron Smith give you the financial report last month in August. It was based on June numbers, so these are June final numbers. So the only difference, we had a few transfers from other agencies, and that difference was about 1.5 million. But we have the same numbers. There's basically no changes in revenue at this point. For other funds, especially license revenue, it continues to stay strong. Not much has changed with federal funds revenue at this point. It's still looking pretty flat. We still continue to be spending conservatively, and we do project that spending is going to pick up as we progress in the biennium. So I wanted to give you an update on where we're at with 2019-21 budget development. I'm pleased to report that we just submitted our agency request budget for 2019-21 on August 30th. So that's really the budget that you approved in June is what was submitted. It's really our requirement to submit our 2-year budget by September 1st of every even numbered year. So we met that requirement. This is really the first phase of our 2019-21 budget process. We're anticipating the release of our Department of Administrative Services, the Chief Financial Office Analyst recommended budget in the coming weeks, and we're getting ready for an appeals process where if the analyst recommended budget, we have some of our policy option packages that are denied, we have the opportunity to go meet with DAS and ask for some of those amounts back. So we're preparing for that. I also wanted to mention that we're pulling together our key performance measure data. The deadline's coming up October 1st for us to submit our results, and that will become our 2018 annual performance progress report. We didn't request any changes to our KPMs this cycle. We do publish our annual performance progress report on our website, and then that report will go in any subsequent budget documents that we provide through the process. I also wanted to provide an update on audits for you. So we have 2 audits going on right now at the department that continue. One is the Secretary of State audit. It's 2018 financial statements. We think that will be over in December of 2018. We also have Department of Interior auditors on site. So they're looking at the wildlife sport fish restoration program spending for both 2016 and 2017. And that should wrap up in the next month or 2. I do have an update for you. I believe we've mentioned in prior meetings that Secretary of State was doing an audit of internal auditors in the state. And they just released the results of that audit on August 29th. So I wanted to go over some of the findings for you. The purpose of that audit was to determine the steps that DAS should take to more effectively coordinate state internal audit functions. The report was written to DAS as they're really the statewide coordinator for internal audit functions, and therefore they gave the audit responses. So there were 4 key findings in the audit. The first is that internal audit functions in Oregon are not prioritized or well understood by some agencies. The second finding was that internal audit functions in some agencies don't follow important elements of professional audit standards. The third finding was that DAS's efforts to strategically manage and coordinate statewide internal audit functions could be improved. And again, that was really the focus of the audit. And finally, they found that additional investment in internal audit functions could increase value and return on investment for the state. So ODFW was called out specifically in the audit in a couple positive ways. The first was that we were credited for prioritizing internal audit through our efforts to repurpose other funds and create the full-time permanent position that we do have that's auditing for us. We were also recognized in the audit as meeting many audit requirements and best practices. And so that was positive. We weren't mentioned in the audit in any other way that's concerning or negative. And then in the audit, they used the state of North Carolina as kind of a best practice, and they focused a lot on North Carolina's staffing model. And according to that model, ODFW would be recommended to have 2 to 3 internal auditors. So that's something that we'll consider going forward. With that, I'd love to open it up to any questions that you have.
Any questions from the commission? Great.
So when would we know when the POPs would be approved or denied?
Chair Weber and Commissioner Woolley, we should know in the next few weeks. We have a new analyst, and so things are looking new to her, but we expect to know pretty soon. I think it was mid-September that she started diving into our budget.
Okay. We always have a lot of interest in those, and so it would be good to be updated in some way with the progress of
Sure,
those option
absolutely.
packages. Yeah.
Yes. And then the governor's recommended budget will be published December 1st. So we should know well before that the status of our POPs.
Mr. Chair, I would like to clarify a little bit on that, in that while we will have our appeals process at some point, we have 48 hours to respond with an appeal. We are very judicious in what we do and do not appeal, because obviously everybody wants to appeal everything that doesn't go forward. But we probably won't officially and publicly know what packages go forward until the governor's budget is released. So we won't be issuing a press release or announcing publicly what we think is or is not going forward until the governor's budget is released, which is really when we officially know. So I don't want to have any false expectations that in 3 weeks we're going to know which POPs or policy option packages, which are new programs, may or may not go forward.
Yeah, I think just to clarify too, really I was referring to the analyst recommended budget. So that's different than the governor's recommended budget. So it's really after the governor's budget is published that Director Melcher is referring to, that's made public. We will get some indication internally, and that's why we're preparing for those responses.
Very good. Thanks, Erica.
Sure.
I'd like to then go to the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program and Commission. I think Maida Lofsgarden is here, the Executive Director of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And Commissioners, you'll recall that I believe about a year ago, approximately, you all did appoint 2 members representing the Fish and Wildlife community to the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program Commission. So Maida, take it away.
For the record, Maida Lofsgarden, Executive Director, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. I'd also like to recognize Mary Wall, who's here in the audience today. She is one of the commission members who you appointed last year to this program. I'm going to provide a brief update about where we are with the program and then see if you all have any questions this morning. I want to give specific thanks also to Commissioners Weber and Buckmaster, who have both at various stages been involved in this program from the OWEB side as the former representative from the Fish and Wildlife Commission and the current representative. So the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program passed in July of 2017. And it provides a suite of voluntary programs for farmers and ranchers, the goal of which is to really integrate the agriculture values of the property with the conservation and habitat values of the property. It was developed collaboratively between a group of agriculture and conservation organizations and passed through the legislative session with bipartisan support. A few needs of that the program is designed to address. First is across the country there are programs for working land conservation easements. So conservation easements that support habitat values on lands that continue to be farm, ranch, or forest land. Oregon has not had such a program in the past, in large part because our land use laws are really strong here in Oregon. And so for many years it was felt that there may not be a need for that type of program. As a result, in Oregon, there is a federal program that is designed to match those state easement programs. In Oregon, we've received 0.19% of those national funds because we haven't had a good state match for the program. In addition, and I think of large importance to this commission, in addition to the easements, this program also, if funded by the legislature, will also fund conservation management plans on working lands and help landowners to implement those plans. So whether or not they choose to permanently protect their land, funding is provided to enhance those habitat values and continue to have sustainable agriculture operations. The third piece, and a little bit distinct, but I still think important to this commission, is 2/3 of Oregon's agricultural land will change hands over the next 2 decades. Most ranchers do not have a succession plan to transfer those lands. And without that, you end up having lands that are transferred to 5 children and then 10 grandchildren. And you don't have that oversight and management that you might have with a working agricultural land. So that's just by way of reminder why the program exists. OWEB is the administrator for the program, but it has its own distinct commission. What I wanted to do briefly is talk to you about where we are in the process and then speak a little bit to the rules and how they prioritize fish and wildlife habitat. So we did bring on the commission last February. As you know, as a commission, they then entered into rulemaking, which was pretty intensive for this group because they were also the Rules Advisory Committee. They met monthly or more over the last 6 or 7 months, put together a draft set of rules for a brand new program that didn't exist before, and did a phenomenal job of that. We've held public hearings on the draft rules. They will be approving their rules in November. We've received a number of public comments and are working to address those. And then the OWEB board will vote in January on final approval of those rules. At the same time, we do not have funding for the program other than the funding that was available to start the commission. So we have a policy option package request into the legislature for $10 million to start that program. We have also begun running a solicitation just on the easement side to see what kind of demand that we have. The last that I've heard, we have over 20 landowners who are ready and prepared to enter into easements if funding becomes available for the program. And that's when we're doing a solicitation for a program with no funding. So I think there's a fairly big backlog out there of landowners who are interested. So finally, I'm going to jump over to the rules side and just briefly mention to you, so when the commission developed rules, it is largely a grant-making program, similar to OWEB. So the biggest policy decision that they make is how do we prioritize these projects for funding over time. The commission really took seriously its role of integrating agriculture and conservation. So there are entire sections in the rules about maintaining farming and ranching values on lands. Those lands cannot be selected for either a conservation plan or an easement if they're not already working agricultural lands. So the base criteria for the program, you have to be in agriculture to begin with. And then I'll just note from the fish and wildlife habitat, water quality, and natural resource values side, they highlighted specifically habitats and species identified in the Oregon Conservation Strategy, Oregon's Agricultural Water Quality Management Program, which is ODA's equivalent on the water quality side, and any other local, regional, state, federal, or tribal priorities or plans. So the focus here is to make sure that when we are selecting agricultural lands for protection, permanent or conservation management plans, that those properties have to be addressing the state's conservation strategy or other associated plans. They also need to protect, maintain, or improve connectivity for wildlife habitat or quality of habitat, or protect or maintain water quality and sustain other ecological values. So there's a pretty strong push here to make sure that, again, these lands are integrating both agriculture and conservation. As I mentioned, we should have final rules in January. The OWEB board has final rule approving authority for this program. The OWEB board also has final funding approval authority for this program. So, and at the end of next session, we actually hope to have a funded program. I want to thank you again for your support and for providing both Commissioners Mary Wall and Bruce Taylor to the program, and I would open it up to any questions that you might have.
Bruce?
Thank you for the report, Madam. The Fish and Wildlife Commission received a communique from a longtime weighty friend of the Commission, Jim Myron, regarding the inclusion of riparian buffers in the rulemaking for OAHP. And you and I had a chance to talk about it a little bit yesterday, and he is not here today, but I'm certain he's watching. And I was wondering if you would mind making a quick comment on how we might be able to incorporate riparian buffers into the program.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner, for the question. So currently in our rules, there's already a reference to the state's agriculture water quality management program and its priorities. However, there's a distinction between what Mr. Myron is asking for and what's in our rules. The agriculture water quality management program requires that landowners address water quality if they are near a riparian body, and that might mean through, it can absolutely mean through riparian buffers, but specifically it requires that they make sure that there is available riparian area to ensure water quality for the program. Mr. Myron's request is to go above and beyond what the minimum requirements are for the Ag Water Quality Program. We are currently in conversations with the Department of Agriculture to find out what would be the appropriate mechanism that does not move us to a point of saying that we want to change the state's statutes on agriculture water quality management, but rather that through the conservation management plans that we are funding, that we do those to the best level possible and address riparian habitat. One of the challenges in Oregon, I'll just say up front that I know you all recognize, we grow 220 different crops in this state. So having one standard for how we deal with water quality when you're looking at blueberries and ranches is a big challenge. When you're looking at peach farms in Kimberly where you barely have enough room to put the peach farm in, and then you go straight up an embankment, it's more difficult to put in those riparian areas. So what we're going to be doing is working with ODA to find something that is flexible enough to address our 220 different crops that are grown in the state, but also recognizes that if we're trying to address the Ag Water Quality Program, this program really ought to go above and beyond what the minimum compliance requirements are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maida. And Commissioners, we also about a year ago appointed members to another commission with the exact same acronym, but it was the Ocean Acidification and Hypoxia Commission. They have recently finished their report. They'll be presenting it, I believe, to the legislature here at the September legislative days. And we will bring that OAH council back to also brief the commission on their work over the last year. Thanks, Maida. Next up is Mr. Bill Bradbury, and he's going to talk to you all about some of his recent work with the Columbia Basin Partnership Task Force I'm not sure if Jim McKenna and Tucker Jones perhaps are going to join.
Yeah, I think so.
And while they're doing that, I was going to take the director's prerogative here on a couple things. I was going to mention also a piece of federal legislation. It's Senate Bill 2942, and I'm not looking for any direction here. I just want to update you on this. Senate Bill 2942 is named the Migratory Bird Framework and Hunting for Veterans Act, which all sounds very great. However, the department has some serious concerns with that bill. It literally blocks in federal law the 2017 waterfowl regulations, including a hardwired end date of January 31. A companion bill has already passed the House on voice vote, and so we plan here in short order to be working with the governor's office to at least make our position known on this bill, in that it completely throws science out the door in terms of setting annual harvest seasons for waterfowl, ducks in particular. So I just wanted to alert you all to that, and turn it over here to Mr. Bradbury, and then I'm going to take the director's prerogative a little bit after Bill's presentation.
Okay. I'm Bill Bradbury, and I'm a former a lot of things. Used to be a member of the legislature, and then I served as Secretary of State, and most recently, I recently retired from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, representing Oregon. And I want to give you a brief overview of a 2-year National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration process that Tucker Jones of your staff and I and Jim McKenna from the governor's office recently went through with about 50 other fishery stakeholders in the Columbia River. The issue before the group was salmon recovery, and as I think you know very well, everybody has a stake in that issue. Tucker provided a 1-page summary that I gather is now available to you or will be soon. And I want to touch on some agreed upon regional goals for salmon recovery. And so let me just read to you briefly the Columbia Basin Partnership goals for salmon. The number 1 goal was to restore salmon and steelhead in the Columbia Basin to healthy and harvestable, fishable levels. That has a number of sub-goals. First one was to prevent declines, reverse and prevent declines in both listed and unlisted salmon and steelhead in the entire Columbia Basin. Achieve Endangered Species Act delisting. The goal was to recover ESA-listed salmon and steelhead to a point where they're no longer threatened or endangered. Third goal was to achieve broad sense recovery. NOAA basically and this group put a goal to restore listed and unlisted salmon and steelhead to healthy and harvestable levels. And finally, rebuild spatial distribution and run timing of salmon and steelhead at the local and basin-wide scales, including in currently inaccessible areas within the historical range of the salmon. A couple other goals, that's the biggest goal. 2 other goals: provide diverse, productive, and dependable tribal and non-tribal harvest and fishing opportunities for Columbia Basin salmon. And finally, and related to hatcheries, produce hatchery salmon and steelhead to support conservation, mitigate for lost natural production, and support fisheries in a manner that strategically aligns hatchery production with natural production recovery goals. So that's sort of the bigger picture of the goals. And, you know, this sounds like something that this commission and the Fish and Wildlife staff, and fishery advocates like myself, we could come up with this. But the remarkable truth is that these goals that I just read to you were agreed to by a very, very broad group of stakeholders. And let me just, to drive this home, let me just read you some of the stakeholders who have agreed to these goals. Obviously includes the 4 members from the 4 member states of the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. That's no surprise. 4 representatives of the Columbia River tribes, both Critfic and the Colville and the Spokane and the Snake River tribes. That's also no surprise. You would expect them to support those goals. But where the surprise comes is when you look at the larger group of stakeholders that were involved in this process, 2-year process. Includes the utilities, Grant County Public Utility District, and the Western Montana Electric Generating Cooperative. From agriculture, 6 Ranch Incorporated and Kittitas Reclamation District, the Idaho Water Users Association, and the Idaho Governor's Office all agreed with these goals. Ports, Port of Portland, Port of Cascade Locks, signed off on these goals. Commercial fishing, including the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations and the Coastal Trollers Association and a couple others all agreed to these goals. Sport fishing, Northwest Sport Fishing Industry Association agreed with these goals. And from the conservation side, Idaho Rivers United, Oceana, Trout Unlimited, and the Lower Columbia River Estuary Partnership all agreed to these goals. Now, I gotta say, many of these folks are suing each other over salmon. And I think all of us, including this commission, play a part in that. But I think it's significant that these sometimes litigants have agreed that healthy, abundant salmon need to be part of the Columbia River environment and economy. Now, I personally am thankful that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration invested the time and effort to pull this group of about 50 folks together over and over and over. We met in Portland, we met in Boise, we met in Wenatchee, we met in Hood River, we met in Spokane, starting in January of 2017 and continuing through 2018. We have another meeting in October, and this process will continue into the future. So I'm really an optimist. I'm hopeful that this agreement starts to get us all focused on the needs of salmon and steelhead in the Columbia Basin, and all of that will really help recovery. So thank you so much for your attention, and I wanted to ask Tucker and Jim if Jim, you wanted to talk a little bit about governance going forward, and Tucker, I'm sure you have some wonderful.
Mr. Chair, and Bill, I believe Jim is picking up the torch here on the Columbia Basin partnership.
Right. Thank you. Yes.
Just real quick, mostly nuts and bolts, a little bit of a communication snafu with email. You're supposed to have some of those briefing materials earlier in the week. Wires crossed on email, so apologies that you just got those today. The first is just a briefing memo that provides sort of a broad overview of the partnership and sort of its intent. The other are sort of the provisional qualitative goals. I'll send that along again in electronic format to the commission. There are also provisional quantitative goals that Bill spoke about. Those are about to be released again on an update that they've incorporated a bunch of new information. And rather than send you something that was, or bring something that was 3 months old, that was about to change within the next 48 to 72 hours, I thought we would wait and get you out that updated draft as soon as I can. And I want to say that I agree with Bill. This has been a remarkable process. a little bit frightening sometimes when you can find yourself at a table with the Idaho water users and not in disagreement. So that's, it's been a remarkable process where everybody has sort of set aside their sort of outside of the room differences. And you know, there are 1,000 plans and numbers everywhere, but there's not this unified thing. And at first I was pretty skeptical of the process. But I think having a set of unified numbers that look beyond just delisting and into the future, you know, something that talks about, you know, wild spring Chinook in the Snake River on the order of 500,000 returning to the river mouth or more is, and having Idaho on board with all of that, you know, both through natural production levels and hatchery production levels is a pretty remarkable thing. It's asking for levels that were last seen sort of pre, I think, Lower Snake River Dam. So that's a pretty aspirational goal, and I think it's been a good thing, and I think it's and we don't want to let slip away. So I'm excited that we have these provisional goals here.
Yeah, and I think kind of tying into all that about the effort of these parties coming together and developing both these quantitative and qualitative goals has been pretty remarkable. And they're going before MAPEC, I believe, early October for approval. But I think just as important to these quantitative and qualitative goals, and the fact that we appear to have achieved consensus on them, is the structure by which we got there. And as Bill mentioned, a fantastic effort by NOAA and all the partners to come together and cooperate to develop these goals. And it's going to be imperative that that partnership and that conversation continue into the future, because it's going to take decades to achieve many of these goals. So part of the conversation with NOAA Fisheries will be not only endorsing these quantitative and qualitative goals, but set up some type of governance structure, keep this partnership alive as we move forward. Well, I think we all recognize that through climate change and whatnot, conditions, the water conditions within the Columbia Basin are going to be changing, and we're going to have to be flexible in how every organization implements its programs to achieve these goals. I think one other critical element is that we got great consensus on these goals, but they don't lock any particular agency or entity into specific actions. What Odfw and others can do is look at these goals and see whatever programs they're implementing, how do they help achieve those goals. So it's not locking us into specific actions, but it gives each entity at least goalposts by which to gauge their process and their progress.
Any questions? Holly?
So this agreement, it sounds like, is just an agreement in concept that all of these groups agree that these are goals they want to achieve. So then what actually, how is it transferred to on-the-ground action? Is it that each entity incorporates those goals into their own goals, or how does that work?
Yeah, you said it very well. I mean, the basic process is to get everybody to agree on some basic goals, including hatchery and wild fish. And then it's basically the challenge of each entity that's participating to incorporate it into the effort, whether it be a recovery plan in a certain part of the river, or whether it be a larger salmon process, including the Idaho water use. I mean, you said it exactly right.
And the group plans to continue moving forward and trying to help each other address these issues, I guess, in concert. Out of the gate, there was this thought that if you know, a lot of these things on how you get there have been relatively intractable issues across the region. And if you sort of throw those down on a map right out of the gate, I don't think we would have moved beyond the gate. I don't think Oregon would have, I don't think Idaho would have, I don't think the tribes would have. The utilities wouldn't, nobody would move beyond the gate. So I think an important part of this is getting a win for the region, right? Getting people who are typically not on the same page together, building those relationships, actually discovering that you can find common ground before you start really getting into some of the super contentious issues. Because if you just start with contentious, you're going to end there.
So how will ODFW incorporate these goals? What mechanism?
That's yet to be seen. But they are consistent also. I think Bill mentioned this with recovery plans and all the other things that we are already sort of there. So the lowest level goals are delisting, and those are consistent with recovery plans.
My impression, you can correct me if I'm wrong, my impression is that pretty much what ODFW is currently doing very much fits with these goals. That's my impression. And I don't think that it's a real conflict. There are some conflicts in the region, but one of them is not ODFW working to enhance salmon.
And I think it ties into that, continuing the conversation moving forward. That we get this through MAFAC, we get it through the no fisheries administrator signing on board. Then as we move forward, ODFW and all these other entities move forward with their programs, we have to have that continued conversation to see how our programs and their programs are affecting these goals.
Bruce.
Thank you for the report. I've been following your work since you started it and find it fascinating. I would like at this time to invite you, as you continue on with the program, to host one of your meetings in the Lower Columbia. You've made it. You started up high, and you kind of stalled out in the Willamette Valley, and so I'd like you to keep coming on one of your meetings to Astoria, so that the people there could contribute and see and hear what you've been doing. Thanks.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you. And Bill, so here's where I get to take the director's prerogative. Bill, for commissioners, that Bill mentioned in his opening remarks is really spanning 4 decades of public service in Oregon. He started out as a state representative, served as a state senator, started the Save Our Wild Salmon.
For the sake of the salmon.
Oh, for the sake of the salmon. I'm sorry. I don't have a pre-prepared biography for you. I apologize. For the sake of the salmon. Then he went on to serve as 2 terms as the Secretary of State, and then the last 6 or 8 years, I can't recall, on the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. He's always been just a great friend and ally of the department, but more importantly, a great friend and ally of the resource, and so we're greatly appreciative for that. And it's perhaps appropriate, we're here in his hometown, so this worked out very nicely. But Bill was the chief sponsor in 1981, I believe your freshman year in the Oregon State Legislature, of the legislation that created the Salmon Trout Enhancement Program, the STEP program that you all know and love, and as do our audience members here as well. So we couldn't let this go by, Bill, without having some formal recognition for all your service. And I did, in using my great influence, I did manage to procure a few tokens of appreciation for you and your departure. I'll come and present those to you. But what I've got for you, Bill, is, well, of course, I've got the Oregon Conservation Strategy reusable, recyclable grocery bag. I do also have an Oregon Conservation Strategy challenge coin. And then and here's where the real influence came in. I managed to procure an ODFW service buckle, our belt buckle that we issue for state service. And as the commissioners have seen before. I had one for Bob Weber. I'm just waiting for him to actually officially retire. And the buckle is mounted in recycled, repurposed old growth fir shadow box that I built from a board off my barn, and mounted with a backing of elk hide. So I'm going to bring that up to you now, and maybe we can get a photo op before, and you're going to join us for lunch, I think, as well. Yeah. Oh, very good. That's a swag bag. Just for the record, the total cost of this gift is less than $50.
Please sign these documents and
You don't have
receipts.
any issues with the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. Here's your challenge coin. And then here is the service buckle mounted on the box.
Photo.
Let's stand over, here we go. Yeah. Stand up.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
I've got a lifetime warranty on the box.
Okay.
At least as long as I'm alive, I'll fix it.
Heck of a deal. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah, let me get that.
You know, Kurt, that's great. I just want to say there really are no bigger shoes to fill. And I'm so pleased that Bill is going to be continuing to work with me on the Columbia River Treaty issues. So it's great to have the resource to continue to tap into for this issue.
Thank you, Joe.
I'll be tweeting that photo out later, so all 200 of my followers can see it. Okay, Mr. Chair, that leads us to the point in the agenda where we need you to ratify the temporary rules. You'll see in your TAN packet a list of 20 temporary rules that I or has signed over the signed over the last since our last meeting on August 3rd.
Does anybody have any questions about the temporary rules?
I need to run it this way because it's getting feedback.
Do we have a motion?
I move to approve the temporary rules, 1 through 20 in the TAN agenda, for Friday, September 14, 2018.
I second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt the temporary rules. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Mr. Chair, that concludes then the director's report. I believe we are going to do an executive session between agenda items B and C.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. With
Okay,
that-
to the minutes. Did anybody have any corrections or additions to the minutes as proposed?
Only take a graphical.
And I would say that we would approve these and allow Michelle to make any spelling or grammar corrections.
I move to approve the minutes for the August 3rd meeting.
Is there a second?
A second?
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of August 3rd, 2018. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. We're to Exhibit B.
Morning, Chair Weber and members of the commission. For the record, my name is Erica Kleiner, Management Resources Division Administrator. And I have Kara Wymore here today. Kara is the Electronic Licensing System Project Manager. So as you guys have questions about process change or the new system today, we can really dig in because we have the expert here. So I'll start out. I came before you last month in August and gave you an overview of the administrative roles that we need to change to stand up our electronic licensing system. And so today I'm going to get into a little bit more detail of the individual role changes. So really the basis of these roles is improving our customer service. So we're facilitating the use of electronic tags and licenses. We're allowing for electronic communication with our customers. We're allowing our customers in some cases to complete online attestations of meeting certain requirements. And we're also consolidating and simplifying the point of sale agent roles so they're easier to find. So moving to the first slide, really with this slide we just relocated these three licensing rules to Division 10 from Division 1. They're just a better fit in Division 10. So there's no changes to language here. So moving to the next slide, with this set of rules, we're establishing that electronic proof of a license in the field is sufficient for enforcement purposes. So the documents must still be accessible, but an e-tag, for example, would work for enforcement. We're also adding some new definitions needed to launch the new ELS. So the main changes are expansion of the licensing, or the license definition rather, to include electronic, and also the ODFW ID number, which will be assigned by the ELS. That's now defined in rule. We put 0006 into the agent eligibility section. That's later in Division 10. Again, just a better flow in trying to consolidate like rules. But the requirements for agent eligibility remain exactly the same. Moving on to the next slide, with this set of rules, so 0008 is a new section that's needed for the new electronic licensing system. So it establishes the ELS as a system of record. It eliminates the requirement for ODFW to send correspondence to customers by mail, and it also requires email addresses. Moving on to 0009, this is where this referenced pricing, which can be found in rule and statute. And then 0010 also was another move of point of sale agent requirements to the agent operational requirements section, which is further in Division 10. Moving on to the next slide, 0012, this is really where we're encouraging self-sufficiency with licensing. So in this rule, we're establishing a $2 fee for items that the department is asked to mail to somebody, or in instances where the department provides assistance with a license purchase when the person could have otherwise completed it themselves. And the $2 fee would also go into effect if we are reprinting hard copy tags for an individual. In 0015, we're removing mail order references for document issuance. And then the big thing in this rule is allowing for that online attestation process. So we did this for low risk, non-statutory requirements. So residency, senior, foreign exchange students. So again, this is an opportunity to put low-risk areas into the electronic process, primarily as a convenience factor for our customers. If we can save them a trip to an office, we want to do so. Moving on to the next section, 0017. This is really just a clarification that a change in license expiration dates requires a change in law. And then moving along to license and tag exchanges. This is a consolidation of similar language from other divisions. It requires a person to present to an ODFW office if they need a tag exchange. Beyond that, it's not new language. Moving on to the next slide. 0020, the duplicate document section is eliminated. And this is because with the new ELS, documents are available online. And moving into 0027, this is the license refund section. It's again a consolidation of other rules in other divisions, or divisions 1 and 10 rather, and it modifies the rule to state that prepaid refunds are capped at 6 months. And then 0031 establishes that the department can still correct errors, but the point of sale license agents can only cancel documents on the day of issuance. And then moving right along, this set of rules, again, this is more agent rules that are consolidated into the document issuance and the agent operational requirements section for ease of finding them in a central location. And then 0090, here we cleaned up the language to include permit and parking documents and agent's responsibility for lost documents. And then moving to the next slide, we clarified that a youth license can be obtained before issuing a youth combined angling harvest card. This was just a clarification of the word youth in front of combined angling harvest card. This is, the next section deals with licensing provisions that are applicable to members of our uniformed services. And again, this is allowing them to attest online that they have a military ID that shows they're a member and they're stationed in Oregon. So again, a convenience factor for our customers. The next section contains licensing provisions that are applicable to foreign exchange students. And it allows students to attest ownership of valid immigration documents. Moving to the next slide, 0125 is the section that states an agent is responsible for ordering supplies. We removed this because agents won't be ordering specialty paper from the department with the new ELS. Moving right along, 0158, I wanted to mention this is a section that allows issuance of a permanent disabilities permit. It's modified to clarify permits have a 5-year duration. And then we're getting there. One more slide for Division 10. Here with 0162, this section is comprised of the license agent rules that I've talked a little bit about consolidating. These are pulled together from other sections within Division 10, again, so our people can find them in a single location. We also added agent to the title for clarity, and we reference any references that were in there for point of sale equipment were removed. And then we deleted 0170. This section pertains to how the department currently issues documents under the current license process that is based on paper, and it won't be relevant any longer when we launch the new ELS. And then 0180 is a new section that again is consolidating the point of sale agent operational requirements. And moving on, we've got one more slide, and it's Division 11. Here there weren't any substantial changes. We really just are permitting electronic tagging. So with that, we would love to answer any questions you have about the rules, the system itself, or any of the process change. We're getting closer to the launch of the new system coming up pretty quickly on December 1st. And I'm pleased to say that we're on track and on budget and moving forward.
I've been told we do not have any public testimony, so if the commission has any questions, now's the time.
I have one question. For the licensed agents, will they be receiving any kind of training, or they just get the information about how they connect to our system to do the licensing?
Eric, you want to answer that? Sure. So there's a little bit of a mix about how this will work. We will have user manuals or user documentation for both customers and agents to allow them to understand how to engage and interact with the new system and what those requirements are. In addition, we're going to make sure that through communications and testing that they have the ability to get in and log in their information, set up their own users. They'll have the ability to set up and maintain and manage the employees that they have at their locations. And so they'll be able to get in and do that as a practice during our testing phase.
Anything else?
I just mentioned, Mr. Chair, if I might, that this, this is a big project. We're really taking a leap forward in terms of technology, use of technology. The team is doing, Erica, Kara and their team is doing a great job. We know there's going to be bumps in the road, but we're putting processes in place to deal with those, and I'm really excited, frankly, to move forward with this. And it has not only, and I know I'm whipping that proverbial dead horse here, but it has significant savings, which really allow us to put our precious resources into program as opposed to paying for an electronic licensing system.
Chair, I noticed that my Florida electronic license has an option for automatic renewal. So it comes due, and unless I tell them different, they charge my credit card, and I'm licensed for another year. I'm forgetful, so I'll probably pay for the next 50 years. So, hopefully, the next 50 years. So are we going to have that sort of an option for automatic renewal?
The answer is yes. We are working with our payment processor to set up auto renewal. We have to finalize exactly the logistics of whether or not we would ask them to confirm or respond if they don't want their credit card to be charged automatically. But yes, that is functionality that we expect to have when we go live.
Chair Weber and Commissioner Buckmaster, and most other states, of course, they've seen a significant boost in revenue because of automatic renewal. And in most states, the way it works is that the person will get an email 15 days or 30 days ahead of the time of when they would normally renew. And if we don't hear from you, we're going to process the automatic renewal. So it's definitely on the roadmap and something we look forward to working in the system. And
I would just add that, but it's something that the customer selects at their initial purchase. They select auto renewal, so it's not like we're just secretly going out and renewing everybody. Yeah,
That's the way the Florida one works.
yeah, they select the auto renewal.
No, thanks for the clarification. Somebody would have to set that up in the first place, and then when the renewal came up, they would get notification that it's about to process. So they have a heads up that if they don't want the renewal, they can cancel it.
And Chair Weber and Commissioner Buckmaster, the difference or the clarification that I would add is that those renewals would only happen for applicable products. So for licenses, certainly not things that you have to have some sort of lottery or controlled hunt, things that you would win as a part of your entry. It would just be for those annual product types that we would be able to service.
Okay, I guess we're ready for a motion.
make a motion. I move to adopt the amendments to OAR Chapter 635, Division 001, 010, and 011 as proposed by staff.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that, moved by Commissioner Woolley, seconded by Commissioner Buckmaster to adopt the amendments as proposed. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We're coming now to Exhibit C, and we're going to take hopefully a brief period for an executive session. probably 30 minutes or less. So you feel free to stay. I think we have another room that we can go to. And we'll probably consider this our early mid-morning break. And as a result of the executive session, I need to make this announcement, which you can listen to or ignore. The Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission will meet in executive session. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub F and ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub H, which allows the commission to meet in executive session to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection, or to consult with legal counsel with respect to litigation filed or likely to be filed against the commission. The representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, we will return to open the public meeting and welcome the public back to resume the meeting. So, we're adjourned at the moment.